Lyle and Young way back there. Lyle can't get to it, and it's gone.
Soroka delivers, swing and a drive to deep right center field. Young going back, looking up. It's going, and gone. Goodbye. So here is Henry to deliver, and a swing and a long drive to left. Down the line it goes. It is going, and gone. Goodbye. And now the pitch, swing and a long drive to right field. This one way back. Lyle to the warning track of the wall, looking up, and it's gone. A home run for Ryan McMahon. Swing by Tolia to drive to deep right, sending Lyle back, way back, warning track, and hits the top of the fence and goes over into the Nationals bullpen. Michael Tolia has hit his second home run of the night. Here's a swing and a drive to deep right by Hilliard. Way back, going, and long gone into the second deck to the left of the bullpen.
Salazar's first pitch to Mickey Moniak is cracked in the air to deep left field. James Wood back on the go. Warning track at the wall, and it's gone.
Yeah, that was not good last night. Colorado hit 7 home runs at Nats Park. That ties a Rockies franchise record for home runs in a game. They beat the Nats 10-6. The Nats have now lost 10 games in a row, the last 5 of which have come against the worst team in baseball, Colorado, and the third worst team in the National League, the Miami Marlins. Good morning, everybody. Max is here with me. Chris Russell's going to join the show in about 40 minutes to talk about the Florida Panthers winning the Stanley Cup last night, their second straight title. He'll try to put it in terms that non-hockey people like me can understand. Is this a dynasty that we are witnessing? Grant Paulson will join us at 12, and we'll talk Nats and Skins and a little bit more. Mike Rizzo was on last hour with the Junkies, and Max has cut up some of that sound for us. He talked about Davey Martinez's current situation as manager. We'll play some of that here coming up shortly. But I wanted to start the show, and I know that there's an emerging Nat story here, and we had a Stanley Cup win, but I read this right before the show started, and I wanted to read it. It comes from Denver Dan. Denver Dan writes, Kevin, never called, never written, but I listen. And I know you've been a big John Elway fan over the years. I've been surprised that Elway isn't the comparison you've used for Jaden Daniels. In style, they are as close as any past-present QB comparison I could make. Same height, almost same weight, unreal combinations of on-schedule and off-schedule quarterbacking. Their playmaking ability as passers and runners are identical. Clutch gene present at the highest level in both guys. Both are smart with great work ethic. Daniels is today's Elway. Your thoughts? Thank you for that, Denver Dan. I love this, and I love these kinds of conversations, which we can have this time of year. And you're right. There is a really good comp to be made between Elway and Jaden Daniels. So many similarities between the two. But I think I'm going to beg to differ a bit. I have talked about Elway as a comp, before the draft in 2024, after the draft, during the season. Now, it's not been the only person I've referenced, but Elway has come up for me in terms of comping Jaden to a past quarterback. Steve Young's come up. Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson, Randall Cunningham, even Patrick Mahomes from today's quarterbacks, along with Lamar. I know I've definitely comped him at times to Randall Cunningham, even though I've specifically said that their throwing motions were completely different. Randall had a big windup to his throw. That's not what Jaden has at all. But the Elway comp is a good one. The only thing I would say, Denver Dan, is there are differences. It's not, a complete, identical, it's the same guy that we watched in the 80s, and 90s, into the, I guess, early 2000s. When did he retire? Did Elway retired after the second Super Bowl, which would have been the 98 Super Bowl. So he did not make it into this century as a quarterback. The differences between Elway and Jaden are first of all, Elway had a bigger arm. John Elway and Dan Marino had two of the biggest arms of the era and two of the biggest arms of all time. It doesn't matter that Jaden's arm isn't, a rifle because he's got plenty of strength and he can make every single throw. But Elway on the run could throw the ball 80 yards. Mahomes is today's Elway in terms of arm strength. Jaden is different. Elway had a much bigger arm. I think Denver Dan, it sounds like you're a Broncos fan, would agree that Elway's arm was all time. Rodgers, Marino, Elway, Mahomes. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few. But in terms of just arm strength, and I'm not talking about Jeff George arm strength. I'm talking about you're able to hit the receiver with the arm strength. That was a big difference between Elway and Jaden. And Elway was just a different build physically. Yeah, they are essentially the same height and almost the same weight. Elway was a little bit heavier, but Elway had a stronger build. He was a big, strong dude at 6'3", 6'4". And he as a runner certainly could outrun people and he could be elusive in the open field, but he could also run you over. Jaden as a runner, though, is more explosive than Elway ever was. I mean, Jaden can take it 80, and no one, and just, once he gets to 50 yards, he's got everybody behind him and he can jog it in from there. Elway didn't have that kind of speed or explosiveness, although he was a great runner. I think Elway, if he had been a quarterback in today's game, would have been used as a dual threat, quarterback with packages, that are in the game today that were not in the game back then. He would have definitely been a part of, zone reads, just like Steve Young, and some of the players. Marino would not have been. But I don't know that there's like a perfect comp for Jaden. His explosiveness as a playmaker is all time. Like it's up there with Vic, Lamar, Randall, Steve Young. The throwing ability isn't about great all-time arm strength. Mahomes has that, in today's game. Rodgers had that, Marino, Elway, etc. But he's got really good arm strength and really good anticipation and touch. And then the competitive clutch gene factor, the clutch factor that you referred to, yeah, he's there with Elway. He is there with Montana. I mean, we've seen it in college. We've seen it now in one season in the pros. There is nothing that rattles him. The game's on the line. He is taking over and is totally comfortable in that spot. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if any of these all-time great quarterbacks, and I'm not putting Jaden into the all-time great quarterback, conversation yet. Of course I'm not. He's played 1 year. But the year was so special, and he did so many things at such an elite level that the comparisons were inevitably going to come. I do like the Elway comp. I'm pretty sure, Denver Dan, I've referenced John Elway. Elway is one of my all-time favorite quarterbacks and one of my all-time favorite football players, period. In that era, I mean, I've talked a lot about how much I love Marino. I consider Marino to be in that conversation of the top 5 quarterbacks of all time. It doesn't matter to me that he didn't win a Super Bowl. The quarterback position is so dependent. We're going to get to some of those conversations. I don't know if you guys heard what LeBron said yesterday on a podcast with Steve Nash, but I'm going to circle back to that at some point on the show. Judging players by championships. LeBron doesn't think that should be the case, even though he was the guy that said not 5, not 6, not 7, etc. We'll get to that. We'll get to LeBron's comments and talk about that in the bigger scope of, all of sports. But Elway was definitely, until Brady kept doing it over and over again until he was his freaking mid 40s, I had Elway as my number 1 of all time. I did. And now it's much more about Brady and then talking about Elway, Manning, Marino, Rodgers. Very shortly, Mahomes is going to be a part of that conversation. And for those of you that saw, Unitas play, I understand his greatness. I do. I can't tell you anything about Otto Graham, honestly. Save that for Livero and company. But yeah, Elway, one of my all-time favorites, and he is an excellent comp for Jaden. Steve Young might be the best comp for, Jaden in terms of that era. But it's not, there's no perfect comp. At this point, we hope that we are at the very beginning of a 10 to 15 year run where 15 years from now, God willing, we're having the conversation about young quarterbacks being compared to Jaden Daniels, which, is in play after watching him for one season. All right. The Nats lost again last night. We talked about this on Monday's show, that they had the worst team in baseball coming into Nats Park for 4 games. The Colorado Rockies were 14-57. I mean, they were on pace to have one of the worst seasons in Major League Baseball history. They are a brutally terrible team. And coming off the comments made by Dave Martinez over the weekend, it was, kind of put him into a bind, you would think. In most baseball situations, okay? In most baseball situations, meaning New York, Boston, Chicago, LA, where there is true large-scale passion, where the airwaves every day are lit up with manager sucks, Juan Soto stinks, ownership is terrible. Now, the ownership is terrible conversation would have been the prevalent conversation for a long period of time. And I think you can look at Davey's situation as we did with Chelsea Janes on the show. Tommy and I had a conversation about it on my podcast yesterday. We had Andrew Golden on the show on Monday to talk about it. Look, you can make the case that Mike Rizzo and Dave Martinez have not been given a fair shot, at competing for a winning season, for a wild card berth. And you could look at what they've been given and the lack of spending, certainly in this offseason and the offseason before. And just a couple of weeks ago, they were 2 games under 500. They were sitting there and we were talking about them having, a season that could be described as overachieving. They weren't 30-32. They were actually 30-33 after the night where they beat Texas 2-0, the night that Patrick Corbin came in here and had a very good outing, went 8 innings complete, and the Nats won it 2-0. But they were 30-33 at that point. And since then, they haven't won a game. They've lost 10 in a row. And then Davey made the comments about it's not about the coaches. It's never about the coaches. And that created, the first real Nats drama of this season. Will he or won't he be the manager coming up here in a few days, especially if they don't perform well against Colorado. And clearly they're not off to a good start. I suggested, could he be out if they lost 3 or 4 to Colorado or got swept by Colorado? Well, they've lost the first 2. They play tonight and then they play, a getaway game tomorrow at 1:05 at Nats Park against the Rockies. I mean, the Rockies had 7 home runs last night. They won 10-6. The Nats were scoring a lot of runs. Remember, going back to that Seattle series, the Arizona series, they had 4 straight games in which they scored 9 or more runs. James Wood's a star, clearly in the making. CJ Abrams has had a year. Obviously, Mackenzie Gore's been lights out as a pitcher, but they have terrible bullpen. They don't have enough consistent hitting, and they're 30-43 now. And, they are well on their way to having, another losing season. They're a long way to go. We're not even at the halfway mark, but they're not going to be in contention more likely than not for a wild card team. They are in last place, tied for last place with Miami in the National League East. Whereas just, 2 weeks ago, they were in 3rd place, a couple of games ahead of the Atlanta Braves. Things change in baseball, but this is a very interesting moment. They don't owe Dave Martinez any money past this year. That's the way it was explained on Monday by Andrew Golden. So we know that if they owed Davey Martinez another 2 to 3 years, they'd probably not fire him and pay him. Given that this year is not going to be a year in which the Nats are contending for anything anyway. Mike Rizzo makes a weekly appearance on the Junkies, and he was on last hour, and he said a couple of things about Davey's current situation. You're going to hear what he said when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, and we're also on the team980.com. And don't forget, this show is sponsored by the Team 980's YouTube page. Just open up, the Team 980 YouTube page, hit the subscribe button. I'm live on YouTube from 10 to 1. Craig's on live from 4 to 7. Hit the subscribe and hit the like button for us. That's big. You'll hear what hear what Mike Rizzo said about Dave Martinez when we come back. The Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup last night. I watched a lot of that game. God, every single Florida Panthers game that I watched this year, it started with the Toronto series, and then I watched some of that Carolina series just to see how the Caps would have fared against Florida. And I think I said in the moment, I don't think they would have fared very well. They just looked every game that I watched them in, not start to finish, but enough of games like easily the best team. But Chris Russell will help us sort out the Florida Panthers and what they're in the midst of. They were not the best team during the regular season, but they just won a second Stanley Cup. Chris will join us at 10:40. I will weigh in on the Caitlin Clark situation from last night. If you're not familiar with what happened last night, I'll explain it coming up here shortly. But the Nats lost again last night, 10-6 to Colorado. They gave up 7 home runs in the game to Colorado. For the Rockies, that tied a franchise best. They had 4 home runs in 1 inning, which also tied a franchise all-time best. How about 4 home runs in 1 inning, the 7th, as they stretched a 3-1 lead to 9-1. The Nats did get themselves, 4 runs in the 9th, but they were down 10-2 entering that inning. So given Dave Martinez's comments after Saturday's loss to Miami, when he was asked about the lack of offensive production, and he said, look, and trying to parse out reasons for it, blame for it, if you will. He said, well, it's not on the coaches. It's never the coaches. And that didn't go over well, as Andrew Golden from the Post told us on Monday. Chelsea Janes mentioned it yesterday with us. The players were not very happy about that. And, the timing of it was that they had lost after Sunday 8 games in a row, including 3 straight to a bad Miami team with Colorado coming to town. Colorado, as I mentioned, one of the worst teams we've ever seen in the first half of a Major League Baseball season. And they've come in for the, first 2 of 4 games with the Nats, and they've won the first 2. So in most situations, when you've got a manager that has not had a winning record since winning the World Series in 2019, but they have not had a winning record and a massively losing record since. In most places, that manager would have been in trouble a long time ago. In this situation, they've stuck with them, in part because, ownership isn't giving this team maybe the chance that they perhaps deserve this year with some young talent and an opportunity had they added a bit more to be a better team. Mike Rizzo, I think the best general manager in town for many, many years, although AP giving him a run for his money for sure. And look, the Caps have done a nice job too. Mike Rizzo comes on every Wednesday? I think it's today. He was on today with the Junkies, and I think he makes a weekly appearance with the Junkies. And the Junkies got after it with him. They asked him, about Davies, situation. Here's what Mike Rizzo said.
When he made the comments about don't blaming the coaches, you got to look at the players. They got to play better. Did you agree with that when you heard that?
Yeah, here's my take on that. It's, Dave Martinez is as player-friendly managers I've ever had. He and Dusty Baker, to me, run the clubhouse like no one else I've ever had in my career. So when you talk about one of the player managers in the league, Davies one of them. This guy does 500, 600 interviews a year. He does 2 a day, pregame, postgame, every time, and he's flawless. But he got caught in a frustrating. Angry. We were 6 or 7, 8 in a row at that time, and got caught in a frustrated moment and kind of lashed out. And I think it was out of frustration. Here's my take on that situation. There's onus on the players, there's onus on the coaches, there's onus on the manager, and there's a great onus on the general manager to do a better job. We all got to look in the mirror. You lose 10 games in a row. You said at the beginning, it's hard to lose 10 games in a row. I've never lost 10 games in a row. This is my 43rd year in professional baseball. I've never lost 10 in a row. It's tough. But when tough times come, it's when tough times come, you have to deal with it. And to me, Davey's the same manager in the clubhouse when there's no cameras on him and there's no media in the room. He's the same guy he was in the Marlins series as he was October 30th of 2019.
Right.
So certainly that, and that's the first time I've heard it, doesn't seem like Davey's going anywhere. By the way, the first part of what he said, Tom yesterday with me, and Tom is very close to Mike Rizzo and a lot of people in that organization and covers the team very closely. The thing that he said to me yesterday is that Dave Martinez is one of the most player-friendly managers in the game and has been. Players love him. He never throws players under the bus. And what Mike Rizzo said there to start, Davey is, as player-friendly a manager as there is. He does hundreds of interviews, and he got caught in sort of a frustrating moment. I hear that. I think that that's completely true. I don't think we have, that there have been a lot of instances in where Dave Martinez has made major headlines. Yeah, my first reaction to hearing that for the first time is that Dave Martinez is not going anywhere. And maybe it's the right decision for him not to go anywhere. And look, Mike Rizzo and those guys live it every day. They know what kind of person he is. They know what the locker room feels like, and they can take the temperature. They know what the temperature is, whether or not, guys are quitting on him or bailing on him. But I thought that first part of the comment was exactly what Livero said to me yesterday. Tommy said, this is so out of character for him. He is as player-friendly a manager as there's been in the game. And to sort of, at least the perception was, and look, the words said as much, throw players under the bus. Tommy also suggested, look, he's also very protective of his coaches, of everybody on that managerial and coaching staff. And that was part of it as well. There was more, though, from Mike Rizzo. Here's the second soundbite, Max. This is the one that you slugged as Mike Rizzo on Davey's job security.
Even though you've lost 10, Davey's still your guy. You can't make a change. It's not going to. It's worthless.
Here's what I'll say about that. Pittsburgh hasn't won a World Series since we are family. Colorado's never won a World Series, and Baltimore. Davey Johnson was the last guy who won a World Series with Baltimore. This guy is proven through trials and tribulations that he can handle a roster. He can handle a veteran-laden team, and he's developing at the big league level. And
okay,
my track record is I have fired managers in mid-season. I've fired managers after season. I've fired coaches mid-season. I've fired coaches after the season. We're all being evaluated. We all got to look ourselves in the mirror. And we are at a point right now where we're moving forward with our development of these young kids. I think Davey still has the pulse of the clubhouse. He's a great clubhouse presence, and he's a calming presence. And I think that once we get through this thing and win a couple of games, which we will, that we can right the ship and continue progressing towards winning a championship, whenever that is. And I think that's where my feelings are right now.
Going all the way back to 79, the We Are Family Pittsburgh Pirates. Yeah, they haven't won a World Series since, and Dave Martinez won a World Series in his second season in Washington. And at that point, they had gone 82-80 in year one, 93-69 in year two, and won the World Series, beating the Astros in 7 games without one win at home for either team in the series. Since then, it's been a disaster. 26-34. Look, the COVID year, no organization in sports got as unlucky as Washington did with COVID. Following the first World Series in almost 100 years, you had a franchise that would have benefited significantly in terms of new revenue, incremental revenue, opportunities, corporate sponsors, tickets sold, merchandise, etc. And there was a 60-game season that got started late. They couldn't even celebrate. We couldn't celebrate this team in proper fashion. Not to mention that their owners are, commercial real estate guys, and that was getting obliterated at the same time. And since the World Series, they finished in last place 3 times and in 4th place, next to last, twice. And this year, very much looking like another season in which they are going to finish either 4th or dead last 5th in the National League East. But Mike Rizzo, to his credit, he has fired, in season. He has made changes, and they understand where that locker room is. They also probably understand you need a solution before you start shooting people. That's in life in every, situation, unless it's really bad and you can't do any, harm by making a switch. But from what I've been told, they don't have an obvious replacement on staff. And because he's in the final year of his deal, they can address this at the end of the season. They're not going to be a wild card team this year. They're in the player development mode. And if Dave Martinez is good at that and isn't as good as, managing a bullpen as he is in the development of young players like James Wood and Dylan Cruz, et cetera, what's the point, especially if you don't have a solution? There was one more, I think, Mike Rizzo, on ownership pressure. Here's what he said.
Their approach to the 10-game winning streak is they're very happy about it. They're extremely excited about it. No, we're all very frustrated with it. We're all concerned with it, and we have to play better. And we work as everything we do here is a team. I'm responsible for everything that goes on in baseball. So the good and the bad, and the 10-game losing streak. That's my team that I put out there, and I take responsibility for the successes and the failures of this franchise, and I think that's what leaders do, and I will continue to do that, and we'll continue to strive for to put the best product on the field that the DC people could be proud of.
Mike Rizzo from the Junkies last hour. Look, they've got 2 more with Colorado to try to break this 10-game losing skid. And then they go out west. 3 against the Dodgers, 3 against the Padres, then 3 against the Angels, which is the weak spot of the schedule between now and the All-Star break, because after the Angels, they come home and they face the first-place Tigers, they face Boston, St. Louis, and Milwaukee on the road. I mean, brutal stretch schedule-wise coming up for the Nationals after these 2 games against Colorado. I mean, it could get very, very ugly, and could get to that point in which no matter what you think is best, in the moment for the organization, you don't have an obvious solution. It can't get any worse. We're okay. He's still well-liked, etc. You do get to that point where, let's just say if the losing streak, got to 15 or 18, where optically you have a customer base that's going to wonder if you're asleep at the wheel if you don't do something. So it certainly sounds like there isn't going to be anything happening with respect to Davey Martinez's job in the short term, no matter what happens. You look at their schedule between now and the All-Star break, it is brutal, and they could end up, in a different, situation a week and a half from now if that losing skid is 15 or 16 or 17 games, or something like 16 out of 17 or 17 out of 19 or something like that, if it got to that point. All right, Chris Russell's going to join us next. The Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup title last night, and that's 2 in a row for them. How good are they? Is this a dynasty? Can we refer to it as such in a sport where there have been dynasties, and yet it seems like the results are so random? Those 2 things are in conflict for sure. We'll get to that next.
All right, as you just heard, the Florida Panthers are Stanley Cup champions with a dominant win to close out the series, winning 5-1. Sam Bennett wins the Conn Smythe after leading the league in playoff goals with 15. Tyrese Halliburton has undergone an MRI for a right calf strain to determine the severity of his injury. Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle says they are prepared to play with or without him. The Nats, they dropped 10 in a row after getting blown out by the Rockies 10-6. The Nats gave up 7 home runs. 4 of those come in the 7th inning. The Nats get going against the Rockies tonight at 6:45. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
Knowing that you could win the Stanley Cup?
I think you asked me that 4 times last year.
Paul Maurice, the head coach of the Florida Panthers, they had a 3-0 lead last year in the Stanley Cup Finals against Edmonton, but needed 7 games to win. He was asked, how does it feel to wake up knowing you can win the cup? Well, you asked me that 4 times last year. Well, they asked him it yesterday, and they got it done last night in 6 games, beating Edmonton and Connor McDavid 4-2. Joining me right now to talk some hockey and maybe a little bit more is my guy, Chris Russell, who is on from 1 to 4 following this show on the Team 980. Of course, you can follow him on X at WrestleMania621. So this is your thing. You love this sport. And I am very much sort of on the periphery and jump in, during the postseason and pay attention to it. For a sport that has so much randomness to the outcome, man, it is a sport that produces a lot of dynastic runs. Is this a dynastic run that Florida's in the midst of?
Very well could be. I mean, obviously 2 in a row, and they made the finals the year before that, right? So,
right.
Or the final, I should say before that. What Bill Zito, the general manager, and what Paul Maurice and that ownership group have done to turn that situation around. Kev, it wasn't too long ago. It was like 7,000 people in that arena. I mean, it just wasn't that long ago. And they have completely, of course, revolutionized that entire franchise, that entire organization, and now it's been validated. And Paul Maurice was such a perfect fit. They could go on a longer run. The thing that I would caution, as you point out, right, the Penguins, when they were going for 3 in a row against the Capitals in 2018, one of the reasons why I picked the Capitals in that second round series against the Penguins is too much hockey. You play too much to get to the Stanley Cup final and to win it or fall short, and it catches up to you after an 2-game regular season and 3 rounds of the playoffs sometimes, or even less, and your body just can't handle it, along with the attrition of the salary cap. Now, the good news is for the Florida Panthers, the salary cap's going up. They're going to have to deal with guys like Brad Marchand and Sam Bennett and guys like that and take care of them, and maybe they'll get them all back. Maybe they won't. We'll see. But they do have a lot of their core still under contract and still remaining, and I guess it was a little bit of a difficult path, but it wasn't like, oh my goodness, they had to just grind every step of the way.
I mean, they did go 7 with Toronto in that second round. By the way, you mentioned something, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you go back to, the Islanders, your team of the 80s, the Edmonton teams, they didn't have to play as many playoff games to win a Stanley Cup, right? Weren't some of those early series very short best of 5s?
Yes. I think
I think they were
the exact year that they changed that, but the first round, kind of like how it used to be in the NBA, right? It used to be a best of 5 in the first round, right?
Best of 3 even
that
before
correct.
that,
yeah. So certainly that was part of it. I would say this when I watch the Florida Panthers, and this is going to come off as me being a jerk, I just see players that are not so much better than what we see on the Capitals or other teams,
but
the Toronto Maple Leafs as well, but players that elevate their game a special extra notch that we don't see with the Capitals a lot of the time, that we don't see with the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have just as much talent in some cases. There are differences. I'm not suggesting that everybody is even talented across the board, but we just don't see it. And even a team like the Carolina Hurricanes, which super elevated their game against the Capitals, they had nothing much left in the tank when they ran into the Florida Panthers. So, yeah, the game is weird. As you mentioned, there is certainly some randomness. Now, I think there's randomness to a lot of sports, right? We've seen wild card teams make Super Bowl runs. We've seen wild card teams win in Major League Baseball all the time. There is randomness to every sport, but certainly there is randomness to this sport as well.
Yeah, I tend to watch, I don't watch much during the regular season, but I watch a lot of the playoff games, especially when they're close. It's very electric and exciting when you get, look, the first, we had 3 overtime games in these Stanley Cup finals that were thrilling. Oh. Every time I watch, though, Chris, from the Caps being eliminated on their series against Carolina, their series against Edmonton, there were times where they just looked overwhelmingly dominant. And they weren't that during the regular season, right? They were, they played a better Tampa Bay team record-wise, a better Toronto team record-wise. To get there. But were they, like, it seemed to me at times, like even last night, just overwhelmingly dominant with ice tilted and too many shot attempts. And they just seemed like they were the much better team, even though Edmonton did win too.
So I'll give you something. I went to a Caps Florida Panthers game at Capital One Arena. I want to say mid-March-ish. I remember watching the St. John's, Arkansas game on my phone. So it had to be the first weekend of the NCAA tournament, mid-March. And Vitek Vanacek, who used to be a goaltender here, was in the pipe. So that's, one thing that you just note, okay, it's not Sergei Bobrovsky. And they did not have Tkachuk, Matthew Tkachuk. He was already injured. And Brad Marchand was injured despite them acquiring him at the deadline. And that's kind of and they gave up 6 goals, Kev, in the first 25 minutes of the game. The Capitals just an onslaught. But that was such a different Panthers team mid-March to what we started seeing in mid-April. And even in that Toronto series, they were down 2-0 in Toronto, and they bounced back and whatnot. But part of it is or a lot of it is because they got Tkachuk back and they got Marchand healthy, along with the rest of the core of their team. Guys like Alexander Barkov, their captain, who got the Stanley Cup last night. I got to be honest with you. I watch all these games. I can't watch every single second of them, but I don't remember him being like a huge factor. And yet he's their captain and he's their best two-way forward. I mean, they're stacked. And when they got healthy, and Tkachuk, after the game last night, I don't know if you saw this interview, I think it was with Darren Pang, but he was talking about how literally he had no expectation that he was going to be able to play after the Four Nations face-off tournament. None. He tore the abductor off the bone. I mean, to make that kind of comeback, to play the way he did in this grind, and he said he got better and better as the playoffs went along. Just amazing what they built there, and they've been aggressive in fortifying it.
By the way, he took a cheap shot from that guy Kane, number 91, late in the game.
2 of them.
Yeah. Did Kane get into the handshake line?
I did not see him. I don't
think he did.
I did not see him, and that is pretty low class. If look, we know hockey's a weird sport and a physical sport and a chippy sport. Like, be a man. Evander Kane has always been a very, very questionable, shady character. He has gotten into some trouble off the ice in his personal relationships. He's always been a good player. I'm not suggesting that. But to take the whatever, to follow him around the ice, Tkachuk, and to slash him again, absolutely uncalled for. And again, I did not see him. I was looking for him in the handshake.
Yeah, I don't think
line.
he did. I think we heard who was on the call. Kenny Albert, and I think he picked up on it. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, and we're talking, of course, to Chris Russell. I wanted to ask you about Connor McDavid. A player that many believe is the best in the game and has been for several years. Yep. I heard some of the conversation after the game, post game last night, watching some of it on ESPN, that he has 1 year left on his deal in Edmonton, and that it's very possible they could deal him at the end, in this off season, that he may want to go somewhere else where he's got a better chance to win it all. So it's a 2-part question. One, do you knock him down historically because he hasn't won a cup? And then 2, do you think it's possible that he wants to leave Edmonton?
I have to hold him in a different regard than certainly Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, and some of the great players. And again, not every player that wins a cup or even leads a cup winning team is a great all-time player. Connor McDavid is. But I have to hold him in a different regard than I hold Sidney Crosby or Alex Ovechkin or players of that ilk, right? I just have to. Even though they've made the finals 2 years in a row. And that is to his credit, and that is to his leadership. So yes, I do have to put him in a little bit of a different category, at least for now. Do I think they could trade him? Yeah, I think that's possible. Just from the standpoint of, if you look at it, what is a year? Max might know, year 9, year 10, somewhere in that range. I assume he's going to want.
He just finished his 8th season.
Okay, year 8.
7th season. I'm sorry, 7th season.
All right, so a little bit less than I thought. I thought year 9. Okay. He could still command a 9 or 10 year contract easily, right? And if you're Edmonton, you've already paid Leon Draisaitl big time money. Not that you can't figure it out with, again, the cap going up, but that is a lot to invest in two guys that have led you to this point, and you have a clear weakness in goal, and you need to fortify that. I could see a trade if the right situation comes along. However, that being said, if you're the Edmonton Oilers and you trade away Connor McDavid, are you going to make the mistake that you did, quite honestly, 30 years ago or 30 whatever years ago when you traded Wayne Gretzky to the Los Angeles Kings and you watched Wayne Gretzky? You won another Stanley Cup with Mark Messier as your leader, but you had Messier. Draisaitl is not a Messier type leader, in my opinion. So to me, I would assume they're going to work hard on a long-term contract extension. You probably don't see a trade this summer. If you get to the trade deadline or near the trade deadline and Edmonton's struggling next year, then I think you can see it, kind of like what happened with, and this is in the Wayback Machine, Ray Bourque, and different situation, when he went from Boston to Colorado and then won a championship in his first year in Colorado after spending his entire career in Boston. Again, a different situation, different player, different position, all that stuff. But I see it more before the trade deadline as opposed to this summer.
He just finished his 10th season. I was looking at his most recent contract, which was a 7-year contract. Yeah, you were much closer. Just finished his 10th season, even though he is just 28 years old.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? Like,
I don't know. I mean, I recognize just by watching him in the postseason the last few years how great he is.
Yeah.
Hockey seems to me to be a very dependent sport. And yet, whether it was Gretzky or Lemieux or Crosby, you have these dynastic runs led by all-time great players, and he hasn't even gotten one yet.
Yeah, and getting so close is the argument for, wait, why would you break that up? He's that close. Game 7 last year, even though they were down 3-0, as you mentioned, with Paul Maurice coming back there, and then losing in 6 this year. Again, there's no embarrassment in losing this series. Here's the bigger problem. I guess if you're the Oilers, am I going to pay this guy whatever it takes, $18 million a year, $20 million a year, whatever the number is, over an average annual value, even though the cap's going up, when he scored 1 goal in this series?
Yeah. All right. I'm assuming that you don't think the Caps would have had any chance against Florida had they beaten Carolina.
I am not like most other Caps fans who said, well, just because they matched up really well in the regular season, they would have gone toe-to-toe with Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I think they would have fared probably better, slightly better than they did against Carolina. I do not think they would have won that series. And part of it is, again, Bobrovsky just so steady and so consistent. And when you talk about the depth that Florida has, again, guys that don't even get, even in the hockey community, don't get a lot of love, don't get a lot of shine, because they have so many guys like Sam freaking Bennett scoring, and Carter Verhaeghe, who's killed everybody in postseasons in the past, including the Caps. Guys like that didn't even really shine in this run, and they still won a Stanley Cup.
What's the level of care for Florida in South Florida for them winning this cup?
I think the level of care is clearly more than the Marlins. I think it's probably now back-to-back Stanley Cup titles, probably on par with the Heat, if not bigger than the Heat.
Really?
I think so. It's probably a different audience and a different, because where Sunrise is compared to where, the Miami Arena is, it's a different experience. It's a different world. It's clearly not the Dolphins, but listen, you win anywhere, right? Think about this. Florida, Tampa Bay. Nobody thought Tampa Bay would be successful.
We're talking about Florida, Vegas, and Tampa, I think, have 5 of the last 6 cups.
Absolutely. And Colorado won in between all that, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and Tampa made it to the Stanley Cup final that third year in a row and ran out of gas and lost to Colorado, right?
Mhm.
Florida has now been there 3 years in a row, lost the first one, won the last two. So, you got to kind of wonder what the future holds, especially if they don't get Marchand back, so on and so forth. But yeah, Florida, the state, which may be one of the dumbest states in all the land, and I say that because
It's actually a great place to live from a tax standpoint.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of
but-
athletes like playing in
Yes.
Florida. I can imagine that. I mean, seeing Tampa and Florida's running, and I've got friends that live in Tampa, and they said that the Lightning are huge,
Oh,
in
huge,
Tampa, much
huge.
bigger in Tampa than the Panthers are in
I
South
agree.
Florida.
I agree. And South
But,
Florida is a little more fickle in terms of its fandom, even with the Heat. You know.
Well,
this.
even with the Dolphins, I mean,
Sure.
you could but make the case that the Canes,
Sure.
when they're really good, that might actually be the thing they're most passionate about.
Absolutely.
But beyond that, I think about hockey players, most of whom grew up in cold weather climes.
Mhm.
It must be pretty nice to play and live in South Florida, no taxes, warm weather. You're playing golf on your days off.
Not bad.
I would imagine that Florida and Tampa are really good free agent draws for players. Am I wrong?
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Absolutely. And obviously Vegas is too. And it's no longer, I want to live in Chicago and play with Connor Bedard, or certainly not.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, in Edmonton or Winnipeg or even
my
Montreal or
God.
even Toronto. I mean, you want to play in these tropical-ish places that have become hockey hotbeds. Now, again, I would agree with you. Tampa is probably more of a stalwart, if you will, than South Florida. But you win 2 Stanley Cups, you get there 3 years in a row. You're going to build an entire army of young fans and young men and young women too that are going to come to these games, because we know hockey, how entertaining it is in person. But then when you're winning constantly, it is the thing to do. Period.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, I love the coach. I love his interviews.
Oh, he's so great.
He's a sharp, quick-witted dude.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Spencer
Appreciate
Carberry's awesome, but Paul Maurice is great.
All right,
Thanks,
I'll talk
Kev.
to you later.
Appreciate you.
All right, Chris Russell back at 1 to 4 every day right here on the Team 980. LeBron James said something yesterday on a podcast with Steve Nash. I want you to hear it because I think we can get into a larger conversation about what he said in regards to the worth of championships in the evaluation of players. That's next. And when, along with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, they put together that super team in Miami, and that famous line from that incredibly pretentious press conference, that just ill-fated attempt at generating attention for the Miami Heat. Championships were very important to LeBron back then. They were a measuring stick for sure. They apparently are not anymore. So LeBron James was on a podcast that he does with Steve Nash. It's called Mind the Game. And I guess earlier this week, they started talking about championships and how players in sports are kind of measured at times based on how many championships they've won. Here's what he said.
It's funny. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why it's discussed so much in our sport and why it's the A-all, B-all of everything. You sit here and tell me, you know, Allen Iverson and Charles Barkley and Steve Nash, you know, are fucking wasn't unbelievable. Like, oh, they can't be talked about or discussed with these guys because this guy won 1 ring or won 2 rings or won, like, it's just weird to me. It's like saying Peyton Manning can't be in the same room with Brady or Mahomes because he only has 1 ring. They don't never discuss that in their sport.
Right.
Or telling me that Dan Marino is not the greatest slinger of all time, or he can't be in the room with those guys because he didn't win a championship. They don't discuss those things, you know. I don't know. I don't know. Did Barry Bonds win a World Series? I don't think so. I don't think so. Barry Bonds never won a World Series. So. And you can't sit here and tell me that he's not the greatest baseball player to ever touch a bat. I mean, Jerry West, I think, went to like 9 straight NBA finals.
Right.
And was only able to win 1. Right. And he's the logo of our league.
Yeah.
So you can't sit here and tell me that, okay, well, because he only won 1, the guy can't be in the same room with the guy who won 2 or 3 or 4. Like, why not? This guy, he's our logo.
Yes. So, look, I actually agree with LeBron to a certain degree, and I'm going to get into sort of my thoughts on tying, you know, a player's legacy to championships, because I think every sport is different, football in particular, much different than the other sports. I think, you know, hearing LeBron talk about that in terms of, you know, it's the end all be all. It is in his sport. And again, I'll get to that in a moment. And he started to talk about various quarterbacks and talked about Barry Bonds and other players. And in his league, Allen Iverson and Barkley and Steve Nash, who was sitting next to him. You know, the reason in part, and it's not the only reason, because this was the mindset even before LeBron got into the league and made it to the finals for the first time in 2007. LeBron, by the way, just so everybody understands, he's been to 10 NBA finals. He's only won 4 of them. I say only because he's lost 6. Magic, I think, was 5 out of 9. You know, Duncan was 5 out of 6. But he's been to 10 NBA finals. You know, LeBron's legacy tied to championships is very safe, even though he's got a losing record in the NBA finals. He's won 4 rings. But a lot of the conversation, certainly over the last 15 years, stems from things that LeBron has said previously. Doesn't mean you can't evolve and you can't end up having a different view as an older person. But, you know, the not 5, 6, 7, 8, and, you know, this was LeBron's beginning of putting together the super team to go win what? Championships, because it was the most important thing to him and to anybody in his sport. So the reason that it's the end-all be-all in the discussion specifically of NBA players is in part because of LeBron James. I mean, he made that bed. He helped make that bed. Now, I want to turn it into a conversation where I actually want you guys to participate, and we'll open up phone lines at 301-230-0980. It's a simple question, but there's so many ways to go with it. And the question is simple. Do you judge a player's all-time level of greatness and legacy on championships? Yes or no? Why or why not? I think every sport is different. And I think, by the way, you have to start these conversations with, you have to clear the hurdle of being a great player. Like, sorry, but Steve Kerr won 3 NBA titles. John Paxson won 3 NBA. I mean, you've had a lot of players win a lot of NBA titles, a lot of Super Bowls. But we're really talking about a conversation about great players. And then the separation of great players, based on championships. Is that fair or isn't it fair? When people bring in players who were role players but won multiple titles with guys like Magic or LeBron or Bird or Magic or Russell, I mean, we can't have the conversation about those players. You have to clear the hurdle of being a great player. Like Barkley's in the conversation, Patrick Ewing's in the conversation, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Allen Iverson, Steve Nash are in the conversation. Steve Kerr isn't. John Paxson isn't. Craig Armstrong isn't. So you clear that hurdle, and we're talking about great players. So I think this is such an interesting conversation, and we've had it a lot as sports fans. I do think in basketball, it is fair to tie all-time greatness and all-time legacy to championships. And the reason, simply put, is it is the sport unlike any other where one player has the largest impact on the outcome of a game. You only have 5 players out on the floor at any given time for one team, 10 total between the two teams. It's also a sport in which the postseason is determined based on best of sevens. And best of sevens, as we know, typically reveal the better teams, the better players, than a one-and-done environment does, where anything can happen in a one-and-done environment. One bad shooting night, one bad defensive night, one player who gets banged up, and all of a sudden, you're out and one and done. Not the case typically in best of 7. I think basketball players, and I've talked about this many times over the years, I think NBA players, absolutely, legacy tied to championships is fair. I do. Like, I think there is separation between Jerry West and Magic Johnson, Jerry West and Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing, and Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan went head-to-head with Patrick Ewing and Charles Barkley. And in best of sevens, were typically the best team, and in that sport, led by the best player because there's so few players in the game, he prevailed every single time. Now, I don't think anybody's going to argue Michael Jordan, over everybody else. But I think it is a separator in basketball. Again, because one player has more of an impact on the outcome of a game than you do in any other sport. You just do. It's more of an impact on the outcome of a game than a quarterback. And I'll get to that in a moment. It is. And you play postseasons in an environment in which you get 7 chances to win 4. It's not one and done. There's no flukes. So I think it's fair to tie legacy to championships for NBA players. I do. It doesn't mean that I don't think that Charles Barkley wasn't an all-time great. It just means that Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan and LeBron James, he won 4 of them, are at a different level than Charles Barkley. They're at a different level than Patrick Ewing, John Stockton, Karl Malone. We know the list of great, great players who didn't win. I think when you get into this conversation and we go back to an era that I'm not familiar with, okay, but some of you are, the Russell era versus the Wilt, the Russell-Wilt situation. And based on the logic based on my opinion, I would obviously take Russell over Wilt. I think that's the one in which I would have a difficult time. I didn't watch both players, okay? But I've certainly read about both players. And Wilt Chamberlain just has some of the, well, he does. There's no player in the history of team sports that has more outlier, crazy statistical career numbers like Wilt does. But there was something different between Wilt and Russell. It wasn't like Wilt's teams weren't great. Now, that's the way I feel about NBA players. I think that it absolutely is something that gets discussed and is in many ways an end-all be-all to the conversation of legacy. Again, doesn't mean that I think, great players, historically great players, weren't great players. I just think that there is separation because of the titles that other players have. Now, in football, totally different from my standpoint. I don't think that it is fair to tie greatness, legacy, all-time rankings to Super Bowl titles for a position like quarterback. Yes, quarterback has more of an impact on a football game than any other player, but the quarterback is only out there half the time. It is such a dependent position. They're only out there half the time. They don't play defense. LeBron plays defense. Michael Jordan had to play defense. Tim Duncan had to play defense. Tom Brady didn't have to play defense, or Dan Marino didn't have to play defense. Dan Marino's the number one all-time NFL quarterback that, in my opinion, that didn't win a Super Bowl, only went to one in terms of quarterbacks. But it is so dependent. You're only out there half the time. And in the NFL, the postseason is a one and done. And we know as sports fans, the one and done environment creates a situation in which, in many years, the best team doesn't win the Super Bowl. The best team doesn't win the NCAA tournament. And in baseball, you have so many moving pieces. Yeah, you are an offensive player, but you're one of 9, and you only get a certain number of opportunities in a game. You are out there, in many cases, unless you're a DH, as a defensive player. I think baseball is one of those sports where it's incredibly dependent. Pitching is often the most important determinant factor in a best of 5 or a best of 7 when you get to the postseason. And if we're talking about some of the greatest players in the history of the game that didn't win a World Series, incredibly dependent. I don't think it's fair in baseball to tie it to legacy, all-time greatness. I don't think it's fair in football. We talk about Brady's 7. Look, I do think Brady's the all-time greatest quarterback. And I think his numbers are so outlying, in terms of 7 and winning, another one with another team at the age that he won it at. But I also think his great play factors into it. But one of the reasons he got to that point where he went to 10 and won 7 is because of his greatness. I think Aaron Rodgers and Dan Marino are two of the greatest throwers of the football that I've ever seen, period, in my lifetime of watching football. Aaron Rodgers in his prime, Dan Marino in his prime, hard to find. I think Elway's in that conversation. Hard to find guys that threw it better, period. Dependent, man. Utterly dependent. Miami never had a running game with Marino. At times, they didn't have a great defense on some of Marino's teams. I didn't, Peyton Manning for many years until he finally won that Super Bowl where they beat the Bears in South Florida in the rain. And then he got another one at the end of his career where he was far from the Peyton Manning we knew. Peyton Manning is certainly one of the all-time greatest quarterbacks. I've said before that I've thought for a long period of time, and I still feel this way. I think he's a bit overrated in the context of some of the other great quarterbacks. I don't know that Manning would be on my Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks. I think I can find 4 or 5 or 6 that I'd have ahead of him. And part of it for a while was playoff record, but it is still very dependent upon the rest of his team. But remember, Peyton Manning in some of those playoffs where they got beat at home as a 1 seed did not play well. He didn't play well. Lamar Jackson has not played well in the postseason. But I think for me, it's sport dependent. I think in the NBA, I can justify separating those that won it all from those that didn't. And again, we're talking about great players. Okay, we're not talking about role players. In the NFL, specific to the quarterback position, it's hard for me to say that Dan Marino isn't one of the greatest quarterbacks. I watched him. I know what I was watching when I watched him. I think Aaron Rodgers at his best is one of the greatest that's ever lived. He's only won one. He did get one, but he's never been back to one. And I can't separate them that much from, others like Montana that might be in that greatest of all time conversation, or Manning, who does have 2 Super Bowls, or Elway, who does have 2 Super Bowls, even though he failed miserably in his first 3 attempts. But that was dependent. They did not have, a great defense during some of those years. Not to mention, they ended up against great teams in the Super Bowl. I mean, I look back at Elway's early career where they went to 3 against, Washington, the Giants, Washington, and San Francisco, and got run in all 3 of those Super Bowls. And it was amazing that they even got there. Like, it was such an overachieving for that team, those Dan Reeves teams. And it was all because of Elway. They wouldn't have sniffed the postseason without him. So 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. We'll take calls on this. LeBron all of a sudden wants to downplay tying championships to, all-time rankings or legacy discussion, even though a big part of why we have those conversations in the NBA is because of LeBron. Although it's not just because of LeBron. We were having those conversations long before LeBron even got to the league. But, simple question. Do you tie all-time rankings, all-time legacy to championships? And you heard my explanation. I think it's sport specific. I think in the NBA, yes, it's fair to do so. I think in the NFL, it is not fair to do so. In hockey, I'll let others weigh in on it. I would say it's not fair to do it with all of the players that are on the ice and it being sort of a random sport. And yet, the greatest of all time, the Gretzkys, the Lemieux, the Crosbys, have won a lot of titles. And I'm sure that there are plenty of hockey players that didn't win that are considered all-time great too. Baseball, I don't think that greatness should be tied to championships. Just too much going on, and pitching is so crucial. And if you're talking about a pitcher, they're only out there 1 out of every 5 games. 301-230-0980. We'll take your calls on this next. LeBron James in a podcast, on a podcast yesterday with Steve Nash called Mind the Game. I guess, do they do this podcast together?
Believe
Max?
so. I believe they do.
Because I thought I saw something recently with the two of them talking together as well.
Yeah,
but
I'm pretty sure Steve Nash is the JJ Redick replacement.
Ah, got it. The podcast that he did with JJ Redick last year. Got it. I didn't realize that that's how it went. LeBron said about, championships being sort of the measuring stick for greatness, legacy greatness. He said, I don't know why it's discussed so much in our sport and why it's the end all be all of everything. You can't sit here and tell me that Allen Iverson, Charles Barkley, and Steve Nash weren't unbelievable. They can't be talked about or discussed with these guys because this guy won 1 ring or 2 rings. It's just weird to me. Then he goes on to talk about guys like Brady and Manning versus a Marino as an example. So the question is, are you one that ties your opinion of someone's all-time greatness, all-time legacy to rings, to championships? For me, it's a bit, I guess, nuanced. I don't do it in football. I do it in the NBA. At the NBA level, one player has more of an impact on the outcome of a game than in any other sport, just based on the number of players that are on the floor and the amount of control that one player can have on the outcome of a game. And remember, in the NBA, they play best ofs when they get to the postseason, not one and dones. And best ofs are much more revealing of the best team led by, theoretically the best players than a one and done environment. In the NFL, it's just hard, man. The quarterback's only out there half the time. Yeah, they touch the ball more than anybody else. And their impact on the outcome of a football game is greater than any other position. And it's up there in terms of the impact on the outcome of a game in sports, but you're not out there half the time. And when you get to that postseason, it's one and done. And we know anything can happen in one and done. So for me, I've always felt like championships are a separator in the conversation of all-time greatness for NBA players. I don't feel that way about the NFL quarterbacks specifically, because we don't talk about defensive players and titles. We don't even talk about running backs and wide receivers in titles. It's all about the quarterback position and rings. Baseball, really hard to tie, a Ted Williams to titles when, pitching has so much to do with the outcome of games. And he's not out there pitching. And then if you want to look at a pitcher that's never won, he's only out there once out of every 5 days. I just think these are different conversations. That's what I would say to it. What do you say to it? 301-230-0980. Let's start with our guy, Rod in Landover. Rod, go ahead.
Hey, what's up, Kevin?
Hey, Rod.
Well, you know why LeBron is downplaying it now. Because he know he ain't going to catch Mike, he ain't going to catch Kobe, he ain't going to catch Magic. So, of course, he got to downplay it just a little bit. But
yeah, but LeBron, people that don't like LeBron, and there's a lot to me that's phony about LeBron, I'm not going to lie to you, but he's won 4 and been to 10. I mean, that's pretty amazing. He's gone to more than almost anybody not named Russell.
Exactly, but like you said, he's lost more than what he won. But I'm gonna say this though. What's interesting, just to stick to the basketball topic, I say yes and no. Rings is tied to greatness. I think it's one exception to all this though. So when you look at basketball, to me, a great player, if he's going to win titles, he has to have a good running mate. Like when you look at Jordan and Pippen, you look at Bird and McHale, you look at Kobe and Shaq, you look at Magic and maybe Kareem. I mean, the running mate to me is so important for a superstar. Now the only thing I would say about that, when you look at Stockton and Malone, the only thing I think that stopped them was the greatest player ever, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
When you play the Michael Jordan era, when Michael Jordan started winning, I don't care who you was.
Yeah.
You was not winning a title.
Right.
So I think that's the only difference, because LeBron, I mean, look, LeBron needed Dwayne Wade to get his first one.
Yeah.
So to me, the running mate is very important to a superstar. I would say this last thing. If Charles Barkley had, I don't know, Drexler or Dominique Wilkins or one of these other great players to go against Mike, maybe he might have beat Mike. But to me, I think you just need a superstar. Michael Jordan to tell you he couldn't do that without Scottie Pippen.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important.
Well, I think that's totally fair, but it doesn't change the fact in terms of who the alpha was and who the best player. But you're right. You know, he didn't do it without Scottie Pippen. I think your other the other thing you said is how we would view, you know, players like Patrick and Barkley and Stockton and Malone had they not played in the Jordan era. But they did. You know, there were great players during the Celtics, Sixers, you know, Lakers run in the 80s that didn't even get to the finals. I mean, you know, I think, yeah, you know, Stockton and Malone are interesting because those teams got there, but then had to face. And remember, they had opportunities against Olajuwon's teams too, and didn't get it done. So.
True. I'm going to say this last thing. Can I say this? The only team to me that didn't have a complete running mate, and to me, they run is very impressive, and I don't think they talked about enough, is the Detroit Pistons. When they won 2 straight titles, and to me, Isaiah was the man, and then he had a bunch of role players. So to me, they are one of the only teams that won back-to-back titles.
Joe Dumars wasn't a role player. All right.
I don't put
Lambeer and Rodman weren't. I mean, they were role players. Isaiah was all-time great. Remember, they got to 3 too. They lost the first year in 7 when Isaiah got hurt late in that series to the Lakers. But yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, but they did. Isaiah won. He got 2 titles. Thanks, Rod.
Right.
Yeah, I want to get that. We got full calls here. I want to get to some other calls. Appreciate it. The question is off of what LeBron said on a podcast with Steve Nash, that he's now kind of downplaying championships and how they're tied to the evaluation of a player's legacy. How important are championships to a player's all-time greatness, all-time ranking, all-time legacy, in your opinion? For me, again, I'll just net it out. Very important to me with NBA players, not as important with quarterbacks. Quarterback is so much more dependent. They're only out there half the time. I think there's a big difference. Let's go to AJ in Annapolis. AJ, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. Quick, I wanted to start with the legacy thing. The big 3, you know, it started originally with the Celtics, in my opinion. Like, you had 3 future Hall of Famers. You know, everyone says that he created the super teams. Paul Pierce wasn't going to win a championship by himself. Right? Kevin Garnett wasn't going to win a championship by himself. Ray Allen wasn't going to win a championship by himself. So they all went to Boston. LeBron at 23 years old, he's playing with Larry Hughes, Delonte West, whoever. It's not good enough. He realized at that point, there's too much expectations. I'm the chosen one. I need to go somewhere. These guys just created the big 3 because they are all future Hall of Famers that weren't going to win solo. And then they went to Boston, so he went to Miami, then he started winning. If he had stayed in Cleveland, when you think about it, they probably lose again to Boston. They don't get Kyrie, or he doesn't go to – he probably has 1 or 2 championships. So that's the biggest thing. And if some of those guys in the 90s, Reggie Miller and Charles Barkley, they all ganged up like Paul Pierce, Ray Allen.
But hold on for 1 second. Weren't Pierce and Rondo drafted by the Celtics?
Yeah, Rondo. But Rondo, I mean, I'm talking about the big 3, the Hall of Famers.
Okay, Pierce was drafted by the Celtics, correct?
Right, yeah, Pierce was drafted. So what does that mean? I mean, Dwayne Wade was drafted by the Heat. It's not. He had to do it.
I'm missing your point. They didn't put together from all these different places and just land in Boston in a planned, you know, 3-headed monster. Is what I'm saying. Like what we saw with Bosch and LeBron.
Yeah, that's what I want to clear, because that's exactly what they did. 100%, that's exactly what they did. And I think that part needs to be talked about as far as legacy across not just this show or whatever. I mean, they're the ones that started the big 3, however you want to put it, whether it's some master plan. Kevin Garnett wasn't going to win a championship by himself, right?
In Minnesota.
Paul Pierce.
They were good. He had some good teams in Minnesota.
Right. So they had to come together, and they knew that LeBron was on a verge of Paul Pierce wasn't going to pretty much beat him with Rondo. or whoever they were going to get. Kevin Garnett, they're in his
Pearson
prime.
Rondo.
That was Pearson Rondo. But when they got Garnett, and then you have Ray Allen, so that created like this stigma where LeBron, he has all this pressure to win at least one. I mean, at that point, right? At that point, he has to win one. It was like 7 years. It was weird that he hadn't won one, but it was like he was too young and by himself almost. So,
well, I mean, it wasn't that different than Jordan, who, had to eventually win one too after 7 years of falling short specifically to the Pistons in the postseason. Look, I personally don't think of the Celtics, and I, by the way, think of them as more than a big three because I think Rondo was crucial on that team. But I don't think of it the same way that I think of the summer of 2010. Maybe it's because of the presentation of it all. I don't view it the same way. I'm not saying that you're not wrong, that you're wrong to think of it the same way, but there was real intention and then real hype, and the presentation of it all for some was off-putting. I do think you're right that LeBron was starting to feel the heat, and let's not forget that last game, losing to the Celtics in 6 as he walked off the floor, ripped off his jersey, in the Eastern Conference Finals. There were moments, in some of those series with Cleveland, even when he got to Miami that first year, when they lost to Dallas in the championship series, where he didn't come up big in the biggest moments. But anyway, you're not answering the question. I want to get back to the question. Do you tie it to legacy or not? Championships. Oh, we lost him. Oh, that was a good conversation. Sorry about that. You dropped accidentally. Call back in. G from the shop. What's up?
Man, LeBron, he worried about his rankings all the time, man. And he talking about no one ever talks about it. We talk about this all the time, Sheehan. You know what I'm saying? But I do agree with you about the dependent sports, because football definitely is dependent. Because you ain't going to tell me Buffalo ain't one of the greatest teams I ever saw, but they lost 4 straight. So it definitely is dependable. But I do all my rankings off of what I see and I test. So basketball-wise, you ain't going to sit there and tell me that Chris Bosh is ranked higher than Chris Webber because Chris Bosh got a couple rings. You ain't going to tell me Steve Nash isn't a better point guard than Tony Parker, who has 4 rings and is in the Hall of Fame. Like you brought.
Well, that's
up
why I
Detroit
said
Pistons.
the conversation we have to start with. We're talking about a conversation among great players. I'm not talking about Will Perdue or Kurt Rambis or Derek Fisher. Due respect, I think Derek Fisher was great, or even Robert Horry, who's got 7 or 8. I think we're talking about. You have to clear the hurdle of being a great player to have this conversation.
No, and see, I do think some of them role players you named were great players. They just downplayed their role to get them championships. Like Robert Horry was an all-time super
clutch,
talented 6'10", but he adapted to the role that was needed to win them championships.
Right.
Just like
but we're
Chris
not
Bosh.
we're not comparing Horry to Patrick Ewing. We're comparing.
We talk. But like you said, I seen Patrick Ewing, and Patrick Ewing, without any rings, definitely is in the convo of all-time greats without the rings. Like you brought up the Pistons. I agree with you about Joe Dumars. He was all that number 2 that Zeke needed. But the role players, like look at the role player they picked up. You ain't gonna tell me Mark Aguirre is better than Adrian Dantley. It's all eye test. You know what I'm saying? Like Sheehan, if Kevin Garnett got drafted to the Spurs, I think Kevin Garnett would have 5 rings like Tim Duncan. It's all eye test for me. That's how I do my rankings. I don't care if you got.
That's fair. I do a lot of eye tests too, but I think the separator in that sport, because a lot of it, what we're talking about is, you have to separate. I mean, I think we do this anyway based on the eye test. But let's just say, Jordan was a slightly lesser player. You would separate him because of the titles over Ewing and Barkley and Stockton and Malone, the other great players from that era.
No, there you go. You go. No, I don't. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
Eye test based. Kevin Durant has multiple rings, will be in the NBA Hall of Fame. But I've seen him and Michael Beasley play, and I think Michael Beasley was a better player. You see what I'm saying? It's all.
You
out there
think
for
Michael
me,
Beasley was a better player than Kevin Durant?
Michael Beasley is the greatest player I've ever seen from this area, hands down.
Wow. You've never said that before. That's
No,
nuts.
I've
Beasley is
plenty
an
of times.
absolute gifted all-time player. Kevin Durant might be the greatest individual bucket getter of all time.
And see, that's a conversation to be had because I can throw a couple names like Carmelo Anthony and Kobe Bryant in that convo, and it's all opinionated. But I don't.
How about the
rate it.
Iceman? We could throw him into that conversation.
You see what I'm saying?
I know, but that's not the
feel that
conversation.
it's a
You don't, even though you recognize the difference between basketball and football, you don't tie, legacy to championships. That's fine. That's why we're having this conversation. You're entitled to that opinion. I think in basketball, I do, because of the impact one player has on winning.
But see, Sheehan, how about this one? Chris Webber, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett. Damn near equal, but one don't got a ring. And Chris Webber was an all-time great. I don't need him to have a ring for me to know that he's ranked up there with them dudes.
I don't need rings to tell me that Garnett's got rings. That Charles Barkley and Stockton and Malone and Steve Nash and Patrick Ewing weren't all-time greats, but I don't put them at the same level as those that have rings, especially multiple rings of the great players. I think it is a separator for me. It doesn't mean that I don't think they're all-time great players. Of course I do. I just would say, yeah, I'll take Duncan over Garnett and Webber. I will. I think he impacted. Yeah. And you may be right. If Garnett had been drafted to San Antonio, we may be having a different conversation, but he wasn't. So we only have what we have. All right, I need to move on. I got to get to a break. And those of you on hold, stay there. Ronnie, Robert, Aveen, Ian, Bill, Paulie. I'll try to get all of the calls in. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980.
All right, last night, the Florida Panthers closed out the Stanley Cup final. They are the Stanley Cup champions with a dominant win, winning 5-1 over the Edmonton Oilers. Sam Bennett wins the Conn Smythe. He led the league with 15 postseason goals in this Stanley Cup playoff. Tyrese Halliburton has undergone an MRI for a right calf strain to determine the severity of his injury. The Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle says they are prepared to play with or without him. The Nats, they dropped 10 in a row. They get blown out by the Rockies by a score of 10-6. The Nats gave up 7 home runs, 4 of those coming in the 7th inning. They get going against the Rockies again tonight. 2 more games against Colorado at home. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15. First pitch at 6:45. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
From my guy Seth in Potomac, he said, I love G, but you said they had to clear the hurdle of being a great player. Michael Beasley never averaged more than 10 points a game. That's actually not true. He did average more than 10 points a game, but he had many seasons in which he averaged less than 10. He averaged 19.2 points per game in Minnesota in 2010-2011. That was clearly his best season of all time. His career averages 12.4 points per game, 4.7 rebounds per game, 1.3 assists per game. Yeah, I would say that is fair, Seth, and I love G too, but we're talking about putting now G would put Beasley into the conversation with Kevin Durant. So he can do that. I would not do that. I would put him into that area, even when you look at minutes per game, during the course of his career, he only averaged 22.8 minutes per game. That's almost the definition of a role player during the course of his career. Let's go to our guy, Ronnie. Ronnie, go ahead.
Peace and love, Kevin.
Hey, peace and love, Ronnie.
Kevin, you can't tie championships in the NBA. The reason why, Michael Jordan, Isaiah, and all those guys, Barkley and them, there wasn't free agency. They couldn't form, big threes. So how they're being punished because the rules were different.
Well, I mean, our greatest dynastic runs were prior to being able to put together the team. Is that what you're saying? I mean, once free agency became a big deal and players started putting together big threes, that should have given them an opportunity to win more titles. I'm not sure what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is, okay, you mentioned like Bill Russell. There was no free agency in Bill Russell's team. So whoever the Celtics had, they had. Whoever the 76ers had, they had.
Well, the draft was actually based on regional back then too, but that's a completely different game. But go ahead, get to your point. Sorry.
The point is you're judging people by rules that aren't the same. Because LeBron is one dumb Draymond Green play from having one less championship.
Right.
So if he had 3 as opposed to 4, would you still consider him one of the GOATs?
Yes. Yeah, 3 is a pretty significant number, and going to 10 is a pretty significant number, and winning 3. Yes, I would with LeBron.
The best team that Barkley ever played on was the Suns, and he got traded there. He didn't go there as a free agent.
Right.
Name another Hall of Famer.
What do you mean, name another Hall of Famer?
On that
I'm missing the point. So back in the day when you have, Russell with 11 and, great players, Kareem with 8, Jordan with 6, Kareem with 6, Jordan with 6, Magic with 5. You couldn't, put together these teams. And they won all these titles more than anybody that came after them, other than Jordan, right? Duncan had 5, I guess. So you had the ability to perhaps put together super teams, and they didn't win as many. It sounds like
that was on management. That wasn't on the players.
I know, but it sounds like you're implying that it was easier to win titles when you couldn't, coalesce into a big 3. That doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm saying. I'm saying it's harder. It was harder.
Right.
Because Barkley had to play with whoever was on that Suns team. He couldn't go get Malone and Stockton.
Barkley did have the ability to sort of control where he got traded, though.
But he couldn't get traded to a team that had another great player.
Well, he ended up choosing those Phoenix teams, right? And those Phoenix teams had, Kevin Johnson, the guy that ended up becoming the mayor of the city.
Sacramento.
Danny Ainge. Who else did they have on those teams? Who was their best player?
Dan Marley.
Yeah, Dan Marley, of course. KJ and Dan Marley were 2 and 3.
And wasn't the center West? I mean, come on, Kevin. I don't understand.
But what's your point? I mean, Michael Jordan didn't have a center. I know he had Pippen, but what's your point?
You're not.
I am missing the point. So I'll tell you what. The best way to get to this, so you don't tie championships to your evaluation of all-time greats.
No, because in my opinion, the second greatest player on that Dream Team was Barkley.
Right. In that moment, he was. But do you think he was a better player than Larry Bird was? Than Magic Johnson was? Career-wise, they were just older players then. What?
Larry Bird had McHale and Parrish.
But I'm asking. So you think Barkley was a better player than Larry Bird? Was he a better player career-wise than Magic Johnson?
Kevin, that's not what I'm saying. But one player is not going to win you a championship.
Okay.
Barkley didn't have the help the other guys did.
Right.
Karl Malone had Stockton, but who else did he have?
Okay, but he did have Stockton.
So you believe two players can win you a championship in the NBA?
I think, yes, I guess I do think that. But that's not really the conversation. Again, we're getting sideways here. I think I have finally identified what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that my point that one player in basketball can impact the outcome of a game much more so than in any other sport. And that's why I do tie championships to basketball is unfair because Jordan had Pippen, Magic had Kareem, Larry had, Parrish and DJ and Ainge and McHale, and Barkley didn't have a great number two at any point. And Patrick didn't have a dominant number two at any point. That's fine. I get your point. Now, I think that's what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah, that basically that's what I'm saying. And the bucket getter, and I'm just going to add this, and I know this is off topic. Bernard King is as nice a bucket getter as anybody who ever laced him up.
In terms of bucket getting, yes. And by the way, bucket getting in big playoff games too. I gotta roll. I gotta get to some of these other calls, Kevin. Ronnie. I appreciate it as always. Peace and love back at you. Everybody on hold, stay there. I got to take a break. Grant's going to jump on with us at some point in the next hour and talk about the Nats situation. We'll talk some football team as well. But stay on hold. Do you judge legacies in sports based on titles won? 301-230-0980. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. Don't forget to watch us if you want to on our YouTube channel. So Ronnie got stuck on Barkley there for a while and talked about in Phoenix him never having a true number 2. That's true, Ronnie, and I was not quick enough to respond, but I was thinking about his Houston team in particular. He did play with Drexler and Olajuwon on those Houston teams that ended up losing to Utah in the Western Conference Finals. And while this would be unfair, remember, he started his career playing with Moses and Dr. J, made it to an Eastern Conference Finals, and did play in multiple playoff seasons with Dr. J. An older Dr. J, but still with Dr. J. But good call. All right. The question is, do you tie championships to your evaluation of a player's overall legacy, overall career ranking, greatness level? LeBron James on a podcast with Steve Nash essentially started to downplay the importance of championships in the evaluation of players. Somebody called in and said, LeBron's doing it because LeBron's never going to catch Mike, etc. LeBron does have 4 and has been to 10. He's got pretty good championship pedigree when all is said and done. Let's go to our guy Brandon in Woodbridge. Brandon, go ahead.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, Brandon.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
I was just thinking about the one caller called in and I think was kind of talking about back in the day versus now, and I think like now we are now seeing where the players are now like almost like GMs, where like, hey, he's the superstar and he wants to have this guy go with him and this guy go with him and kind of build his own team. Where before, the players that didn't have that luxury, so they were more so whatever the GM kind of puts together is how we're going to kind of try and face this particular season. And I think that has a lot to do with back in the day. You can say that, hey, the reason why they won this championship is because Jordan had Pippen, he had Kerr for some 3-point shooting, he had Dennis Rodman. That's a GM and a coach. That's like all together, all of them came together and created that particular team.
Sure.
Whereas now,
of course,
like
that plays into it. The organization that you're with. I mean, the Garnett, Tim Duncan, I forget who threw that out there. Like if Garnett gets drafted by San Antonio instead of Duncan, does he end up with 5 titles? I think you could make the case that he would have. But he didn't get into that circumstance until he got to Boston from Minnesota. But go ahead. How would you answer the question? Do you tie rings to legacy?
Now, great players and legacy stands on its own merit. So when it comes down to that, if LeBron is obviously one of the best players that's played the game, that's his legacy, and that goes along with the championships that he won. But then I can't necessarily say somebody like he was saying Charles Barkley or somebody. I'm trying to think of somebody else that didn't win. Maybe Drexler. Maybe
Drexler did win. Drexler won with Hakeem.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Yes, he did. Yeah. But I'm just saying, as far as like certain players, if they're that good of a player, then their game kind of stands for their legacy.
That's fine. I just, as a separator in basketball, I look at rings. In football, I don't. Thanks for the call, Brandon. Let's go to our guy, Aveen in D.C. Aveen, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin. I largely agree with you. I think it's mainly a basketball thing. I think with baseball and hockey, no one player can control things as much. And in football, there's too many other components like coaching and roster construction. Although, Brady and Mahomes, we've seen, just will their teams to wins like year in, year out, take their teams out of situations where it seems impossible. And we kind of saw that with Jaden Daniels last year. Like we had a bad defense and he took us to the NFC Championship. So I think with really elite quarterbacks, there might be an exception, but they're kind of the outliers. But what the question I have for you is with basketball is I largely agree with you, but I also think there's an unprecedented level of talent and parity in the NBA. Like what's going on with player development and the level of athlete in the NBA is like I think there's more superstars in the league than there's been in past decades by a lot. And I think even the rotational players are just such high level, multifaceted athletes. They can defend multiple positions. They all can run the floor. They all can space. They all can shoot from the perimeter. A lot of them are high-level rebounders. Are there just more good teams in the NBA than there has been in past decades?
In very recent years, yes, no doubt. We are about to see our 7th straight different champion. That never happened prior to 7 years ago. We had Golden State Cleveland 4 years in a row. You know, we had Golden State, winning the last one when they beat Boston. That's been part of, this run of a different champion every year. This year, we had a matchup of two teams who haven't even been in the NBA Finals. Yeah, it's different now. And a lot of the restrictions and a lot of the rules related to salary cap, et cetera, have sort of dictated this. It's been engineered a bit by the league to create, more parity when we didn't have it for a long period of time. Yes.
Right. So my question for you is, I think Jokic is a really good case study for this, because Jokic is putting up like old-time crazy numbers and all his advanced things. He's like one of the most best well-rounded players ever. And so if he only gets one finals title, like, do you view him differently? Is it the era he played in, or do you
I don't know. At least he got it. At least he got it, and you can say that he got it. And and by the way, he got it because of him, more than anybody else. Whereas with others, you can't say that they even got there and got that ring. But yeah, one would be disappointing with a player like Jokic. But I think, to your first point, and I think it's a really good one, and thanks for the call, as always, Aveen, is we are in a different era now in the NBA. We have a lot more parity in the NBA than we've had in a long, long time. So it is getting harder to win a title because there's more depth and more parity. It's a fair point. Let's go to Paulie. Paulie, go ahead.
Big guy, how you doing, man? Hell
What's
to
up?
the W. Hey, yeah, I'm loving this right here, man. So let me ask you this: who is the greatest basketball player of all time?
Jordan's number one for me.
Jordan's number one. Okay, cool. So we're gonna start here. So my whole thing is, for me, is the eye test, and I say this because I don't think you view championships on people's legacy unless we talk about the one of one. All right, and to my mind, there's only two people that we should be talking about being one of one. And that's Jordan, and that's Bill Russell. And you just said Jordan is your one of one, but Bill Russell has more championships than Jordan. So that kind of debunks your whole theory.
We're not comparing those with numbers of championships. The question is, do you separate among great players those who have won a championship versus those who have not?
I understand what your question.
Yes.
I understand what your question is.
So what's your answer, and then continue?
Unless no, I go by the eye test. Unless it's one of one. Unless we talking about the one of one. And the reason why LeBron brings this up because he's insecure of his own legacy. You know what I mean? For me, you got to go by the eras. Like I said, you had the Chamberlain and era. Then you go from Bird and Magic era. Then you go from the Jordan Barkley era. You know what I mean? Now you can separate these guys by the era. Who was the best one of one of those eras? But for me, it's the odds. You gonna tell me Allen Iverson doesn't have a greater or bigger legacy than Kyrie Irving? You know what I mean? So for me, it's just the one is the eye test, unless we talk about one of one. And me, that conversation of one of one is only two people, Jordan and Russell.
Well, Magic's very close for me.
Separator.
Magic's very close for me. Magic.
Hero.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of. I think the one of one list is more than one, but that you asked me which one I would look. To me, it's just, again, it's like, it's really simple. Like when you are talking about with friends, who was the better player? Do rings matter? Yes or no? For me, they do in basketball. They don't in other sports. But in basketball, because of the impact one player has on an outcome, because of the way their postseason, is determined based on best of sevens, I think that I can separate Michael Jordan from Charles Barkley, Michael Jordan from Patrick Ewing, Magic Johnson from Charles Barkley and Patrick Ewing. That's what I would say to that. Tim Duncan from,
but hold on, but it's not
you know,
because of the championships.
yes.
You don't separate Magic Johnson from Charles Barkley because of championships.
It is
Magic
part
Johnson,
of
if
what
Magic Johnson didn't win
separates. It's not the only thing, but it's part of it.
If Magic Johnson never won a championship, we still would be saying he was a better player than Charles Barkley, hands down.
Well, neither
down.
one of them would have titles, so it would be an interesting conversation. But Magic's greatness is what led to titles. Magic's transformational, transcendent play, a 6'9" point guard, led the Lakers to 5 titles in 9 opportunities.
And this goes back what your guy Mark said, and Magic also played with Kareem, Worthy.
Yes, he did.
Great players too.
Barkley played with Drexler
so
and Hakeem Olajuwon. Let's not forget about that in Houston.
Come on, old Drexler.
What do you mean?
Old Olajuwon,
they got beat by by Stockton and Malone.
Old Drexler and an old Olajuwon. Come on now, they all 3 of them was done. That was the all AARP team, man.
Well, Kareem was awfully old.
For me,
Kareem was old.
It's the Come on, man. You had Worthy, though.
Kareem, one of the titles, Kareem was 40 years old.
You had Worthy.
Yeah, I understand. He had Worthy, he had Coop, he had Byron Scott, he had Norm Nixon before that. Right. I get it. I get it.
Those players made him greater as a 6'9" point guard. It's the eye test, bro.
Look, the eye test for me on Magic Johnson is he's in the conversation with Jordan. Jordan would be ahead of Magic. Magic would be 2 in the non-center conversation. But if you told me that Magic's greatness didn't lead to a title, I'd feel differently about Magic. That's what I'm saying. That's where you and I disagree. I would end up feeling different about Magic Johnson, and I'd feel probably more the way I feel about Charles Barkley. But he didn't come up short. He went to 9 and won 5.
No, I'm listen. Who you talking about? LeBron?
Magic.
Magic. Come on, Magic. Okay, Magic. I'm about to say on LeBron with the 10. But the whole thing is, what about Steph Curry and LeBron? How you rank that? Because Steph got more rings than LeBron. I don't care about that bubble chip LeBron trying to throw up in the air as he got 4. Come on. So,
LeBron.
that
okay.
chip don't count, bro.
Look, because they both have multiple titles. All right, they have. It's been more than just one opportunity. They've been there lots of times, and they've won multiple. Now I just go by the eye test. Sorry, I love Steph, and I consider him to be the greatest ball handler shooter in one body I've ever watched. But LeBron's above him on my all-time great list. Not by a lot, but he's ahead of him.
And it's all. But I'm going to say this, I'm going to end it with this. This all started because LeBron is insecure of his own legacy.
That's probably true. That's probably true. I got to roll.
It's okay to be number 2, man.
Yeah.
It's okay to be number 2. Head to the W.
All right. Let's go. Oh, AJ's back on. Let's finish up the conversation with AJ. AJ, thanks for calling back in. I kind of forget where we left off.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for putting me back on. I mean, the original was just the legacy with the big 3 and the Celtics and stuff. So thanks for hearing my point on that. Well, thanks for hearing my point on that. But as far as the legacy comparing championships to players, I think that, like, after you get to a certain thing, like you said, around 3, when you're comparing the Jordans and the LeBrons, like, yeah, you need some rings. So whether it's, and you probably need more than 1 too. But when there's only, 2 or 3 people in that conversation of the greatest, I personally, I love Michael Jordan. I think he's more clutch than LeBron. I think he's more of a killer, right? But LeBron, he has like almost 50,000 points. When you talk about eye test, people got to stop saying the eye test and then not look at numbers. I know we live in a world where someone has 50,000.
Well, part of the eye test is what you said. LeBron and Kobe and Bird are killers. LeBron's never been that as a competitor.
Right. But he has as many assists as John Stockton.
Yeah, look, LeBron was the modern version of Magic Johnson, no doubt.
Right, he's in the top 5 of assists all time. I mean,
yeah, I get it.
Steals.
I get it.
So the eye test is he's with championships and the eye test since St. Vincent St. Mary's. As you can clearly see, I'm a witness. He's up there. He's either 1 or 2.
He is up there. He is up there, but that's not what we're really talking about, because now we're talking about guys with multiples. We all agree Those guys are great. And then we can, have the conversation about ranking those at another time. The conversation is LeBron downplayed tying championships to legacy and to greatness. And so do you yourself believe that rings matter in the evaluation of somebody's all-time legacy? I do in basketball. I don't in football. It's interesting how the conversation's gone all basketball. But go ahead, answer the question, and then I got to move on.
No, I think all rings matter in all sports. You have to have a couple rings. If you want to be considered, they're all stars or superstars, but legacy and all those great players, Allen Iverson, and they're amazing Hall of Fame players, but they're not that one or two as far as the legacy of being the best, right?
Yeah.
So yes, championships matter.
In that
Absolutely.
sport, I agree with you. In football, I don't. Let me move on. Thanks, AJ, for calling back in. Ian, go ahead.
Kevin, I absolutely evaluate championships in every sport except for baseball. I think baseball, the impact is minimal given the amount of touches you have. The reason I evaluate quarterbacks on rings is why we praise Mahomes and Brady. Sure, you can say there's defense and there's coaching and supporting cast, but they are the differentiators between those teams. We've seen Belichick without Brady, and we saw the results. We've seen the Patriots without Brady. We've seen Andy Reid without Mahomes. We understand the impact. In basketball, of course, they play both sides of the court. And I agree. I think there's so much revisionist history with Malone. Remember, he was on the Lakers at the end.
Yep.
And remember, then Charles Barkley, like you said, he played with Hall of Famers all throughout his career. This notion that he had nobody is just laughable. But just sticking to your overall argument, yes, like I look at Aaron Rodgers differently than I look at Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or Eli Manning or Ben Roethlisberger. I think playoff performance,
you can't compare Eli Manning to Aaron Rodgers. You can't do that. Sure, Aaron Rodgers is the much better player. He's an all-time great. Eli Manning's not an all-time great.
No debate. But
okay.
To me, the postseason championship performance is why Eli Manning will be a Hall of Famer eventually.
I agree. I do agree with that.
Why you and I disagree on Phillip Rivers. I'm like, his lack of playoff performances is why he will not be a Hall of Famer.
He actually played well in the postseason. Ironically, Peyton Manning at times didn't. Lamar Jackson hasn't. Phillip Rivers had some excellent postseason games.
Example. Right. Lamar Jackson's a great example. They had the number one defense. They're at home. They have all the Pro Bowlers and all pro players. And his play is the reason they didn't win. And so to me,
against the Chiefs 2 years ago, not against Buffalo in this most recent exit.
Sure. But overall, there's a large body of work. And so to answer the direct question and not compare NBA legacies, et cetera, yes, I evaluate championships as a major, major part of it. Given the devaluing of the regular season in all sports.
There's no devaluing of the regular season in the NFL.
Sure. Fine. Let's say that. But you would even agree the emphasis of playoff performance is a next level. And so for me,
I just know what I watched watching Dan Marino. And there's no way. There's no chance Bart Starr or even a guy like Troy Aikman I could ever put in front of Dan Marino. Ever.
See, I don't know if I fully agree. Forget Bart Starr, but like Troy Aikman v. Dan Marino. But I'll give you this. In the same era, same time, we look at John Elway completely different than we look at Dan Marino because of those two Super Bowls at the end.
The eye test was the same on both of them. They were spectacular. They were all-time greats.
Right. But the differentiator is the two championships at the end.
I know. I'm saying that I wouldn't use that as a differentiator. But you know what's interesting about that specific example is Elway got to 3 with very average supporting casts, and Marino only got to 1 with an average supporting cast. So there is that. And by the way, you could argue the greatest coach that ever lived coaching him in Don Shula. But Marino's a tough one for a lot of people because, like you, I'm old enough to have seen him play, and I don't think anybody's ever thrown the ball better. And I just think he is in the conversation of the 4 or 5 greatest quarterbacks of all time, and he only went to one Super Bowl, and he didn't win it. Thanks, Ian. Let me finish up with Bill, who's been on hold for a while. Bill, go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? Somebody stole
Good,
my
Bill.
thunder a little bit on the Robert Ory point. I think if it's instructive to take that extreme example on the other end, where a guy who's won 7 rings with 3 different teams, who's not even in the NBA Hall of Fame.
I know, but the reason Ori, and I set the ground rules for the conversation by saying we're talking about you got to clear the hurdle of an all-time great. Robert Ori is an all-time postseason clutch, spot-up three-point shooter, but he's not an all-time great player. And that's why he's not in the Hall of Fame despite 7 rings.
I think he is the most underrated.
Okay.
Even it wasn't like he was just barely a role player there. I mean, he was instrumental in winning.
He averaged double
Houston
figures
champions.
3 times in his 16-year career.
Yeah, and he also created the stretch 3 position that didn't.
Yes, he
exist
did.
before him.
In many ways, he did.
And he still holds the record for most threes made without a miss in the playoffs. So
I didn't know that one.
Anyway,
he was clutch.
But
he was clutch. All right, Bill. Yeah. Anything else? I got to roll.
Factor. Yeah, it's a factor, but not the end all be all. Is kind of my point.
Thanks for the call, Bill. Appreciate it. Thanks to all of you. Those that I missed. We'll have another day at some point. We'll come back to this. Grant Paulson will jump on. We'll get his thoughts on the Dave Martinez situation. Mike Rizzo did speak this morning on this station with the Junkies and pretty much led everybody to believe they're not going to do much about Dave Martinez right now. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980.
everything we do here is a team. I'm responsible for everything that goes on in baseball, the good and the bad, and the 10-day losing streak. That's my team that I put out there. I take responsibility for the successes and the failures of this franchise, and I think that that's what leaders do. And I will continue to do that, and we'll continue to strive for to put the best product on the field that the DC people could be proud of.
Mike Rizzo earlier this morning with the Junkies in his weekly appearance, it did not seem, listening to him, that any change at the manager position is coming soon, despite 10 straight losses, the last 5 to the Marlins and lowly Rockies, and coming off what Dave Martinez said Saturday about it's never the coach's fault. Joining me right now from 106.7 The Fan, our sister station, and the Grant and Danny Show, is Grant Paulson at Grant Paulson on X on Twitter. Before we get into what you think you heard this morning and what you think should be done, how good of a manager is Dave Martinez?
Kevin, I think in game, he's probably average. I've never thought he was one of the better managers in baseball, save for, oddly enough, and maybe you could call me a simpleton, the 19 postseason, I thought he was masterful when he really had to go max effort and shorten his pitching staff. He touched all the right buttons. He used starters out of the bullpen. People forget, but Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, and routinely Patrick Corbin all pitched in relief, and they really went pushing the chips all in with their best arms, which I think is how you got to manage in October. You can't do that in the regular season, obviously, and I thought he was really, really good. Where he's excellent, though, and where I've always given him credit, and I think there's actually similarities, it's almost like the Nats have a type, to Dusty Baker is, I didn't think Dusty Baker, who's one of the most accomplished managers of all time in game, was all that great of a manager necessarily either, but he was unbelievable for 21 hours a day, is always what I said about Dusty. Like, there's no one in the history of the sport better, maybe, with players and in the clubhouse and with relationships. And they don't call it a coach for a reason. You're managing people over 162, the ups, the downs, the ebbs, the flows. Davey is brilliant at that as well. He is very positive. He is very optimistic. That the stuff that he says that's kind of eye-rolling if you're just a grown adult in a cynical world is real to him. The winning the 1-0 every day and all that stuff. And players actually in sports, this with football coaches, right? They rally behind that. They like when Joe Madden brings in the snake around someone's neck in the clubhouse during a losing streak, or they put a poster up on the wall of someone who said something bad and slap it when they walk outside. So I think Davey's really, really good, like an 8 or 9 out of 10 at the managing people part of it generally. I think he's pretty average as a in-game manager and has been throughout his entire time here.
In most cities, would he still be the manager in better and more passionate baseball cities?
I don't think so. No, just because as you've seen this year with 3 firings, and it's not like those were in baseball hotbed cities or anything, but it's been a long time. I mean, this is, I believe, season 8 for him in DC. They've been sub 500 for 5 years. Now, I will say, to Davey's defense, I guess, they weren't supposed to be over 500 at any point really dating back to 2022 when they sold off Juan Soto and really bottomed out from a big league talent standpoint. So certainly the last 3 years, the 23, 24, and now 25 seasons, this is a 75-win team maybe that they handed him to go manage. And before this losing streak, they were on pace for more wins than that. And now they're on pace for a few less wins than that. But you can't give me the ingredients to make you a $14 lunch and be upset that it tastes like a $14 lunch. So I haven't had a huge issue necessarily with the results over the last couple of years, but I think that the maddening element for Nats fans, the frustration, Kevin, is they said, and I think this was a self-inflicted wound to some extent. Nobody told them to say this. And this was very obvious in spring training when I went down there this year. This was from the front office to the managerial staff with Davey and coaches to the players. Like, they felt like it was time to win. It's time to turn the corner. We're ready to go compete. And we've talked about this from a football standpoint, you and I in the past. I believe in actions, not words, right? So when a coach comes up and tells you, Mike Shanahan, I'm staking my reputation on Grossman and Beck, and I was on the beat at that time, and right after the press conference, he's telling me, these guys aren't good enough, we're going to lose. Like, they're going to say what they need to say at the podium, and the actions tell you something very, very different. And the actions this offseason were not the actions of a team that was ready to win or that should have won. The roster wasn't good enough. So that's their own fault, though. I mean, fans hear that and they go, oh, they're going to go over 500. They think they can be a wild card team. They're all telling me they can win. And I don't think you can get upset now when people are going, well, wait a second. You told us this was the year you were going to start turning the corner. And not only have you not done that, but at this moment, this snapshot today, it feels further away than it has at any point in the last 5 years.
Before we get to what Rizzo said this morning and what you think could or might not happen in the coming days or the coming weeks, what did you expect heading into this season? What was realistic? Forget what they said. Forget even what, the over-under number was. What did you think they were capable of with, a young James Wood and a Dylan Cruz and some of the young talent and a Mackenzie Gore who's having a phenomenal season? What were you expecting?
I thought that the ceiling for this team was probably somewhere between like 80 and 82 wins and being in the wild card conversation at some point in September, playing important August baseball, being in the mix, because with the third wild card now, if you're a 500-ish team, you're generally going to finish at year's end around 5 or so games off the pace. I thought that was, if a lot of things went well, and by the way, many of those have. You just mentioned Gore leading the major leagues in strikeouts. James Wood should unequivocally be an all-star. C.J. Abrams is playing, despite a bad rut for 3 or so weeks recently, at an all-star level, statistically one of the better offensive shortstops in the league. Like, a lot of the things that they were really banking on, hoping on, needed to happen, have happened. Not all of them. Cruz didn't get off to the start before the injury they wanted. Keibert Ruiz in a linchpin, pendulum swinging season has actually gotten worse, not better. And so, they didn't bat 1,000 on those things, but some of the most important things have gone very well. Realistically, though, Kev, to answer your question, I thought the window was kind of like a floor. A lot of things go terribly, maybe 70 wins. They won 71 the last 2 years. I actually thought they were better than that last year. Remember, that's with selling a bunch of guys at the deadline, and that means in the second half you probably could have done better and won more games if you prioritized it. So I thought probably like 70 to 78 was a realistic window, and I think I had them around 77 wins, something like that.
All right, let's talk about the moment right now. Mike Rizzo this morning on the Junkies. What did you hear from him?
First, I heard he's not making a managerial change. I don't know if you disagree with that, but he sounded like a guy
I totally
that
agree with that.
I thought that, he was not going to fire the manager on the air, but there was multiple ways he could have gone, one of which is at the end of the conversation, you could have felt like Davey's on a red hot seat, and if they don't get a win against the Rockies in the next couple of days, there could be a change. And I did not leave the conversation thinking that at all. I fully anticipate not only will Martinez survive whatever happens the rest of this homestand, but that he's probably going to be the manager foreseeably into the future, barring something crazy happening. But what else I heard was a couple of takeaways. One, I thought he made a fascinating comment at one point at the very end of an answer where he said the word hopefully. He said, hopefully when we're ready to win, we can spend money and bring in players, is basically what he said. I think he said we can add players to the young guys. Well, two-parter there. Number one, again, this offseason, they said they were ready to win.
Right.
And not coincidentally, this offseason is when they should have started spending money. I had no problem with the Lerners punching out in free agency, closing the checkbook, putting it away in a safe for a few off seasons, because there's really no reason to spend on free agents when you're rebuilding. You win more games, you pick lower, and also those guys get closer to the end of their deals. If you're signing someone to a 4-year deal with 2 years left in the rebuild, now I got really 2 years on the back end of a competitive window with that player. But this offseason was different. Brady House got to the big leagues this week, Kevin.
Yep.
It's that's the wave. It has now crashed, right? James Wood, who's awesome. And you look at their prospects that they've been calling up, like Dylan Cruz, who's going to be back from injury soon, hopefully. Brady House. There's other good players in the system we could go into if you wanted, but their best bat in the system right now is at single-A Fredericksburg. So it's not like at AA or AAA, there's another caliber of hitter like the kids that they've called up over the last calendar year that's coming. And so my point is, with Mackenzie Gore having only 2 years of control left after this season, with C.J. Abrams having only 3 years of control left after this season, the time to add and supplement talent and bring in help was this offseason. So that answer from Rizzo is like, when we're ready to win, Well, we already know that they thought that was now, which means they didn't get the money they wanted this offseason. But also the word hopefully.
Yeah.
He sounds like me saying, well, hopefully the learners will spend. He's the team president, and he's just hoping. He has more confidence, it sounds like, than I do, that he's actually ever going to be able to spend on real players again.
Well, part of that, couldn't it be that he's unsure of ownership situation? Who will own the team? If they end up owning the team and understanding that they are now committed to owning the team for several years, maybe they'll start to spend, or it ends up being Ted or somebody else that owns the team, and he hopes that they spend.
I guess that's true, yes. But I also think the most likely possibility, and my assumption is that, and he knows this better than I do, is that there is no sale and there is no new owner, and that the learners just continue to own the team. And if that is the case, currently the team's not quote unquote for sale. I had Ted Leonsis on the air not long ago. I know you did a really good interview with him as well. And when Ted was on, I asked him about trying to buy the Nats, and he said he is forever interested, that he is absolutely still curious and wants to buy the team. But what he told me was that the Nationals are not for sale at the moment because the learners in season never really wanted to discuss it. The last time they had talked, the team was kind of off the market in air quotes. So that's the last we've heard. That's going on a year since like a Washington Post report, something to that effect. So I don't think it's like some imminent sale. I mean, if anything, like the house is not listed on Redfin right now. It's gone. There is no Zillow listing for the Nationals. There's no for sale sign in the yard at this point. That doesn't mean that they're not ever going to sell. But right now, I don't like people that are just hoping that's the antidote is that sometime this offseason they sell to Leonsis and he spends some money and dumps money into the product. I don't think that's realistic right now. So it's really a matter of them re-engaging financially and just whether or not you trust that they're going to.
All right. So, your thoughts after listening to Rizzo, and I felt the same way, is there's nothing imminent. They're not making a change, and maybe not for a while. Do you think he should be considering a change? And then what would lead to him changing his opinion this year?
I think if you keep losing, so it doesn't have to mean that this streak continues, although that would obviously be damaging. But they're about to go out west.
Yeah.
Okay, so I actually talked to Davey for a minute after his press conference last night. And I jokingly said to him as he was walking out of the room, and probably wasn't a great time for a joke, but he said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I said, "Davey." And he looks and I said, "Well, at least you get to play the Dodgers and the Padres when you leave here."
Yeah.
I mean, what a disaster that could potentially be. Now, He is the eternal optimist. And he said, we've played really well out there. And it would be very baseball and very national. They go out there and they take 4 out of 6 from those two teams. But, I mean, if you were to, let's say, split the next 2 or, God forbid, lose the next 2, and then you go out west and have a really rough road trip. They also play the Angels at the end of that road trip. I mean, it just, at some point, your hands are tied. Like, it doesn't really matter if you want to make a change or not. It's essentially just like pulling a goalie in hockey. After the third goal, might not be the goalie's fault. The defense is asleep in front of them. Fourth goal, guy turned the puck over in the neutral zone. You just kind of do it to do it because you've got to do something and you can't bench everybody else. My bigger question, I guess, in the short term is, would they make some kind of sacrificial lamb change on the staff and just kind of give people their pound of flesh and act like that's good enough, whether that's a hitting coach or a base coach or something like that? That's probably just changing the tires on a car that's not running correctly, but I guess that's possible in the shorter term. But my opinion this morning changed, honestly. I thought last night there was a chance that we were going to see something imminently. And after hearing Rizzo, he seemed to me like a guy that has no plans on firing Davey Martinez this season.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a sense that there are, people at the gates, pounding the table for a pound of flesh right now. And, if this thing got out of hand and let's just say they lost 2 more to Colorado and it reached 12 and then they got swept by the Dodgers and it reached 15, in most cases, even though, ownership doesn't want to, answer to fans or you'd be sitting with them eventually, as general managers and coaches say, optically, it would be the thing that 9 out of 10 baseball cities would do. So I do think that it's potentially going to change if we get into 16 out of 17 or 18 out of 20. And the schedule certainly sets up, obviously it's baseball. Anybody can win on any given night. But if it got that bad, I wonder if it would change. It wouldn't surprise me. If it did, would it surprise you?
So do I. No, I don't think it would be stunning if it changed. I just don't, at some point, I don't think you really have a choice. And what Davey has said night after night has been basically that they're going to turn it around tomorrow, right? What Rizzo said today is, we're going to win a couple of these games, and when we start to turn the corner and play a little better, basically the valve gets released. And that's fine. That's true. But what if it doesn't happen? Just because that has been the norm this season when things were bad, that you started to win again, or you flipped the switch and you went on a stretch, doesn't necessarily mean it happens this time. And in the hypothetical where you're asking, what if you keep losing? I definitely think things change. 5 days ago when the homestand started against the Marlins and the Rockies,
right,
people were saying that they wanted a change made, and I laughed at it. I thought that they're not doing that. It's silly. And last night, as they were down 10-1 and gave up a record number of homers to the worst team in baseball this deep into a season since 1899, I was sitting in the press box ready to go home, and I said, you know what? I texted my wife. I said, I got to go downstairs. I got to make sure that Davey walks into that room after the game. I mean, I really didn't know. Now they scratched and clawed and had a good ninth inning, and they were able to, preach the battle that the team has and all that. But I mean, that was as bad as it gets against that team for a second straight loss, for a 10th in a row now, to be down by that number of runs. But the only thing I'll say lastly, on kind of your bigger picture point on the change that could be looming, I guess, is I do think Rizzo and Davey have a very good relationship. And I think that the things that are legitimate in their defense in terms of the quality of the roster, the money that they're allocated, the limitations, maybe even on things we don't understand behind the scenes, and the draft and development and downsizing their staff. I do think there's probably empathy from Rizzo for the guy who helped win him a World Series when it comes to, he knows what his limitations are. I'm sure he feels the same for Davey. Fans don't necessarily care about that. And I'll push back a little bit on the Twitter's not real, but there are absolutely wolves at the doors here. I mean, they announced 11,000 2 games ago. I was there.
I saw that.
I
16 or 17,000 last night.
Right. Last night there might have been 10-ish. I think the night before I'll eat my phone if there was more than 7,500 people at the game. Like that in and of itself is a tell. And then also just the animus is the loudest that I have heard it from the really passionate, vocal following of the team online. You can't make changes because of that. I'm not suggesting that. But if you get to a point where there's 7,500 people coming to your home games during the week, I mean, that's a really big problem.
Yeah. All right. Look, I want to ask you one more, and then I'll let you run. Grant, of course, on with Danny every weekday 2 to 6:30 on 106.7 The Fan. Is James Wood capable of being what Harper and Soto were before him?
Definitely. Yeah, I think he...
Like a legitimate MVP candidate.
Oh, totally. Yeah, this kid's special, man. He does things as a hitter that there's maybe 5 guys on the planet who can do them. And it's Judge, and it was Giancarlo Stanton in his prime, or Shohei Ohtani. I mean, this is unequivocally a bona fide. This is what an MVP, perennial top slugger in baseball looks like when they're 22. I mean, he's going to hit on pace right now for 40 home runs this year in a bad lineup with little protection as the alpha, the guy at 22. Soto's numbers and Wood's numbers, when you compare them at this age, are actually really, really similar. Soto got brought up and dropped in to a lineup with Rendon and Zimmerman and Harper in his first year, in this excellent lineup with great players. And he was just a guy that got to get in where he fit in, and you weren't really keen on him. James Wood's the guy every single night that the opponent saying can't beat us. Last night, the Rockies walked him in consecutive at-bats, didn't give him anything to see. And yet, and still, he's on pace for 40 home runs, which only Harper and Alfonso Soriano, way back at RFK Stadium, have ever done in this organization. But it's not just the power, which I think is the crazy selling point and attribute. It's the discipline, the pitches that he takes, the walk rate, the fact that he normally doesn't get himself out. He is fast. He can steal bases. I don't want him to steal a ton of bases because I need to keep him healthy. But he's coming around in the outfield. He looks a lot better in left field as well. He's going to be a long-term, very solid average defender and less probably with his size. But yeah, this is going to be a perennial 35 home run bat. Now you got to play on a good team to get that recognition, as we're seeing with him, 9th right now in NL outfield All-Star balloting. But Kevin, he's already been top 5 in the league in OPS in this month. I mean, he's number 1 among NL outfielders, not only in that category, but most slug categories. So it's happening already. And this is on a terrible team. What would happen if you dropped him into, I'm just making this up, but like with the Dodgers lineup around him, like what is this guy capable of? I mean, this is really unique. And at this age, this is what it looks like. He's going to be a superstar.
Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Good chatting.
Grant Paulson, everybody. When we come back, some news on Tyrese Halliburton and Game 6 tomorrow night in the NBA Finals. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980.
All right, last night the Panthers won the Stanley Cup Final. The Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup Final. They closed out in a dominant performance, winning the game 5-1. They had the lead 5-0, but gave up 1 to the Edmonton Oilers late. Sam Bennett wins the Conn Smythe, leading the league with 15 postseason goals. Again, the most in the Stanley Cup this year. The Indiana Pacers' Tyrese Halliburton has undergone an MRI for a right calf strain to determine the severity of his injury. The Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle says that they are prepared to play with or without him. The Nats, they dropped 10 in a row. They get blown out by the Rockies by a score of 10-6. They gave up 7 home runs last night, 4 of which come in the 7th inning. They'll re-rack against the Rockies tonight. First pitch at 6:45. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Greg Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
Game 6 of the NBA Finals tomorrow night in Indianapolis. The Thunder can clinch the NBA title with a win. And Tyrese Halliburton, who was not healthy for Game 5, suffered, according to reports, a strained right calf and will undergo an MRI. Now, that was apparently scheduled for today. The results, I guess, later today or early tomorrow. There's a chance, despite it being Game 6, and despite, what everybody would say, which is you got to play. You got to suck it up and play. This is one of those injuries that they will be very careful with. Calf strains can turn into torn calves or partially torn calves. And now you're talking about months and precursor to an Achilles injury, even a ruptured Achilles. They're going to be very careful with him. I really believe that. Plus, they have an option in TJ McConnell to come in off the bench. But it'll be interesting to see if that MRI reveals, a strained calf. That's one thing, depending on the severity. If it reveals like a partially torn or a severely strained calf, it wouldn't shock me if he doesn't play. This is not an ankle roll. This is not, an elbow injury. This is not, something where, you can go out and play and not have significant risk of a serious injury. A calf strain can be a precursor to something very serious. All right. Thanks to Chris Russell, who joined us on the show today. Thanks to Grant Paulson. Thanks to all of you who called. Max did a great job. We're done for the day. Speaking of Chris, he's up next.